Hello and welcome to the daily newspaper analysis. Today we shall be discussing the newspaper of the 5th of February 2018. So coming to the first article, if that door should shut now, the opinion is that India cannot be so opaque to history as to say no refugees will hereafter be allowed to enter its territory. Now, the context of this article is that recently the Additional Solicitor General of India in the Supreme Court has made a statement where he said that we do not want India to be the refugee capital of the world. So it is in this context and it is with regards to this statement that this entire editorial has been written. Now, the context is largely that the Rohingya refugees of Myanmar are entering India's borders, and here there are reports that these refugees have been stopped at the borders by the Indian forces, and for this reason a petition has been filed in the Supreme Court, and as a reply to this petition the Additional Solicitor General has made this statement. So that is the entire context. Now, coming to this editorial, first and foremost, this editorial is a very specific one and it does not have many aspects and many important facts related to this topic, but this topic in total is as such very important. So we shall not be limiting ourselves to the scope of this editorial, and rather the discussion will be much broader than this. So coming to the background, first and foremost, firstly you should know what does the word refugee mean. Now, this word refugee has been defined under international law, and it means that a person who is forced to leave his or her country in order to escape a war, a persecution, or a natural disaster. So it is these three conditions which are mandatory: a war, a persecution, or a natural disaster. So if these are the three conditions which are met, then it is known as a refugee. So that is the first thing. Another thing is that you need to know something about the recent 2013 refugee crisis. Now, this was largely in the end of 2013, so it was from 2013 to 2014. There was a refugee crisis in the entire world because historically the number of refugees had surpassed those the numbers of the World War II. So that is why it was a situation of a crisis, and a large number of refugees, largely from West Asian countries, were seeking refuge in European countries. So that was one crisis that had come, and this is something that is important. Another thing you need to know about is the UN Convention on Refugees. Now, the UN Convention on Refugees was signed in the year 1951, but it came into force from the year 1954. And this is the convention which lays down the norms and the rules for behavior with refugees or ethical treatment of refugees. However, India is not a signatory to this convention, this UN convention. That is something important. Now, coming specifically to the Indian laws, now you need to know that neither is India signatory to this UN convention, nor is it signatory to the 1967 Protocol on Refugees, and as a result of which Indian laws are strictly very less in this regard. The number of laws dealing with refugees are very limited. So that is one thing. And the primary law is the Foreigners Act of 1946. Now, as you can see, this was before independence. Though time and again this act has been amended, but it is still short of the present needs and short of the global standards. So this is something that you need to know in the background aspect. Now, coming to some issues which are important with respect to the refugees. First and foremost is you should know about the current status. Now, at present, India is amongst the top 20 countries in the whole world that host the largest number of refugees. And India has refugees from approximately 70 countries. So India is in the top 20 countries and it has refugees from 70 countries. So this is something that you should know. Another thing is with regards to the problems for refugees. Now, here you need to understand that, as we analyzed before, that India is largely short of laws with regards to refugees. And in this dearth of laws, what happens is that the refugees, they face a lot of problems. And in fact, they even face challenges of basic necessities. So this is definitely a cause of concern, and some regulation, some globally accepted norms and laws are something that is indeed warranted in India. So this is one analysis. Another thing is the problems which the government is facing because of the refugees. Now, obviously, even the government has certain problems. For example, it is a huge burden to the exchequer. Also, there are law and order problems. Often, in the guise of refugees, a number of terrorists can sometimes sneak into the countries. Also, internal security problems arise. For example, we have seen in the case of Assam, National Register of Citizens in Assam problem, that how a large influx of refugees has impacted the internal security in Assam. So that is all are the problems which the government is facing because of large number of refugees. Now, also, this is specific to the editorial, that the editorial causes for a debate on the use of this word we, as I mentioned before in the in the context that the term we has been used here. So it is this what has been argued in this particular editorial. The author makes a claim that this word we has been used irresponsibly, because this word we stands for the entire country, and it is used in the preamble as we the citizens of India. And if anybody had to use this word we, then it should have been mandated at least by the parliament, and only then this word should have been used. So this loosely using of this word we by the additional solicitor general is something that indeed has been criticized here. Another thing that is important is that the editorial talks about the traditional ideas and traditional values of India. Now these are the three traditional values which have been mentioned, and I would suggest that you should make a note of them. These can be used in your essay paper, these can be used in your ethics paper, so that is why they are important. The first value is that of Bahujana Hitaya and Bahujana Sukhaya, which means that everybody should be benefited and everybody should be happy. So that is one thing. Another value is of Lok Anukampaya. This is the value of compassion for the other human beings. This is a traditional value. Another value is Sarva Loka Ashraya. This means that India should provide refuge to all. So these are the three values which are mentioned, and this is something that is important. Another thing which is important in the analysis is the past cases. Now you need to know that this problem of Rohingya refugees is not a new one to India, and not only Rohingyas, since times immemorial. This problem of refugees is a perennial problem for India. For example, in the year 1947, right after India's independence and with partition from Pakistan, a large number of Hindus and Sikhs entered India. Also, then the case of Dalai Lama and the Tibetan refugees in India. Also in the year 1971, approximately 10 million refugees from Bangladesh entered India. Then India is also home to a number of Afghan refugees, Sri Lankan refugees. So this is something that is not new, and in this respect, if this matter is getting so much of criticism now, the reason is that this problem continues for long, and till now India has not come up with a solution to this problem. So that is something that is important. A law in this regard should have already been established in the country, and it is in the absence, in the vacuum of this law, that the problem is becoming huge now. So that is something that is analyzed with respect to the past cases. And another thing in the editorial which is mentioned is that if today India is saying India is taking a hard stand, coming to the next point also, that if now India is taking a hard stand that it does not want any more refugees into the country, then what about the previous leaders who have accepted refugees? So that is the link between these 2 points. Now another issue is that of India being flooded by refugees. Now the additional solicitor general has raised a fear that if the government is lenient, then indeed India is going to be flooded by refugees. But here you need to understand that refugees are not tourists. A difference has to be made. Refugees are somehow people who are being forced and compelled to leave their territory and their homes, and so a degree of compassion is something that Indian government should have. And also, it is not that all the refugees in the world are specifically coming to India, and it is only a small population of the Rohingya Muslims who are coming, primarily because Myanmar shares a huge border with India. So that is one analysis which has been drawn, and this claim by the additional solicitor general has somehow been refuted. So that is the analysis here. Another thing is with regards to discrimination based on religion. Now you should know this was important even with regards to the National Register of Citizens in Assam, that the government is aiming to make a new citizenship law, and as per this, all the Hindu refugees who are entering the country will be given citizenship. So an analysis is called for this because there is a discrimination, there is an issue of discrimination based on religion which is not in line with the secular principles of the country. So that is something that is important. Another thing is an analysis of ethics in this matter. Now you need to understand that these concerns of the government are true, that definitely there is a law and order problem, definitely there is a burden on the exchequer, but this cannot be justified on the basis of ethics. According to ethics, the value and dignity of human life is above all problems, and as a result of which ethics is actually based on the core principle that do unto others what you would expect to be done to you. So on this principle, ethically the stand by the government of India is something that is unwelcome, it is unprecedented, it is something that is not acceptable. So this is something that has been analyzed, and indeed amends should be made in this regard, and compassionate attitude and a welcoming attitude which this country has always stood for is something that has been advocated. Another analysis which is important is that of India as a leader. Now you need to understand that India is claiming leadership role both regionally as well as globally, and for India to claim this leadership role, it is important that India should not take such kind of a protectionist stand, and rather should act as a problem solver, and it should act as a peace giver to the other countries, and especially to the people. So this behavior, this stand taken by the government in the court, is something that is unwelcoming of a global leader, of the claims of a global or a regional leader. So that is something that is important in this editorial. Indeed, the topic of refugees is very, very important, not only from political point of view, in the context of international relations it is important, it is also important as a social issue, and above all it is important in the ethics paper as an example. So that is the relevance of this article. Now coming to the next article, understanding the HPV vaccines risk. Now the context here is that India is introducing the HPV vaccine. The HPV stands for human papilloma virus vaccine in its universal immunization program. So on this basis, there is a huge controversy regarding this vaccine and some side effects related to this vaccine. So that is the gist of this article. Now first and foremost, some background. The human papilloma virus is a viral disease, and this viral disease is spread through sexual contact, and this results in precancerous warts, and often these precancerous warts lead to cancers like the cervical cancer. So that is something that is important, you need to know in the background aspect. Now coming to the issues which have been analyzed, first is about the worrying gaps in the data of the HPV vaccine. Now here there is a case study which has been mentioned. It's a Rome-based epidemiologist Tom Jefferson study, which says that a large number of drug manufacturers are cherry-picking data, and as a result of which adequate safety about this vaccine is something that is not yet achieved. So that is something that is important. You need not remember the name, but you should know. Even if you want to know, then the name is mentioned here, but this is not something that is important. The important aspect that you need to know is that there are gaps in the data. Adequate safety of this data has not been checked. So that is something that is important. Another thing which is important is with regards to a transparency crisis in the clinical trials. Now, by the term clinical trials, what we mean is that these are the experiments to gauge the effectiveness and safety of drugs. Now, these experiments are what are facing a transparency crisis, as not all data is shared and not all data is in the public domain. Therefore, the claims made by the drug companies cannot be examined by neutral outsiders. So that is indeed a major cause of concern with regards to this entire issue. And this is not in specific to the HPV, but this is in general. All clinical trials are not very transparent. So this is indeed a matter of concern, and some transparency in this regard is definitely warranted. Another thing that has been analyzed is the case of drug Tamiflu. Now this drug was developed in the aftermath of the H1N1 influenza virus, and this was a drug which was said to have tremendous benefits in case of H1N1 influenza, and this was also included in the WHO core drug list. However, recently true data on this drug was found, and it was found that the claims made previously that this drug was extremely beneficial in the influenza were wrong, and now this drug has been removed from the WHO core drug list. So that is something that is important, because similar cases might be happening with other drugs also. So that is the parallel which has been drawn with other drugs. So that is something that is relevant here. Another thing is with regards to the side effects of the HPV vaccine. Now some side effects have been mentioned. The first side effect is the POTS. This stands for the postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. Now you need not know the name, but what you need to understand is that under this side effect there is an increased heartbeat. The other side effect is the complex regional pain syndrome. This again is not very important. It is only about pains in the limbs. And the third is the chronic fatigue syndrome. So as the name suggests, it is about fatigue. Now these three side effects that are there, none of them is a very specific side effect. For example, heartbeat could be increased due to a number of reasons. Another thing is that pains in the limbs could be also due to a number of reasons, and a feeling of fatigue is also can be attributed to a number of reasons. So these being not very specific side effects, a conclusive study is something that is not being done, and also some direct conclusions and some direct links cannot be established. So that is a major cause of concern with regards to the side effects of the HPV vaccine. Another thing is that of an issue of inadequate data and research. Now, as I told you, that it is difficult to draw these links. So definitely there is a lack of data and research which needs to be done in this respect. But as of now, definitely there is some inadequacy in both data as well as in research. Another thing is that is very, very important is why this analysis is important for India. Because India has the largest burden of cervical cancer. Around 70,000 women die of cervical cancer in India every year. So this is something that is a major pressing concern for India, because India is very much willing to initiate this vaccination program with respect to human papilloma virus to bring down this burden of cervical cancer in India. So that is one analysis which is important. So here comes the issue of ethics again, because this is a debate between the means versus ends. As the means are themselves shaky, we do not have enough data on this virus. Indeed, this is not a very transparent procedure, and there are concerns with the use of use of this vaccine, but the ends will be that definitely it will have some impact on reducing this burden of diseases. So should these means be used to achieve these ends, or it should not? So definitely this is a classic example of the means versus ends debate. So that is something that is important. Another thing is that there is an understanding which you need to develop about an inherent risk in all vaccines. Now vaccines in generally have muted versions of the pathogen. So what happens is that all vaccines inherently have some risk of causing a disease. For example, even in the pulse polio program of the government, you need to know that sometimes even the polio vaccines, 1 in a million polio vaccines can cause the disease polio to a child. In such a scenario, an analysis has been drawn that even if this incidence is there, this risk is there in almost all vaccines, that does not mean that the government has stopped using polio. And in fact, the pulse polio program of India is somehow very successful, and in 2014 India became polio free also. So if similar analysis is drawn, a similar analogy is drawn for the HPV vaccine, then in that regard some risks of the HPV vaccine should be looked should not be delved into very deeply, and indeed HPV vaccine should be given to the population in India considering the burden of this disease. So that is the analysis which has been made. Indeed, this article is very important. It can come as a case study in ethics. It could be asked as a direct question. Previously also we have discussed some articles on bioequivalent studies. So in all of that respect, this issue is very, very important for ethics paper point of view. So that is the relevance of this editorial. Coming to the next article. Limited succor. Now basically the context is that the budget 2018 has given tremendous benefits to the elderly population in the country. So that is the context here. Now some background is what is relevant. This is largely some demographic data. You should know that at present there are 104 million elderly living in the country, and this figure is expected to rise to approximately 300 million by 2050. So this is one piece of data which is important. And so by 2050 the entire elderly population will comprise of 1/5 of the entire population in the country. This is something that is a very, very relevant analysis, because the population of elderly is bound to rise. At present India is experiencing its demographic dividend. That means the largest share of the population is that of the youth. So definitely the population is going to age in the future, and the government needs to be prepared with its facilities and policies on the elderly. So that is something that is important in the background aspect. Now coming to the issues which have been discussed, first is the issue of a moral duty. Now even the finance minister here has reiterated that to care for those who cared for us is one of the highest honors, and it is indeed a moral duty for India. Now this is a sentiment that is specific to India. This might not be a theory globally, but in India, elderly are considered with deep respect, and it is considered as a moral duty to ensure service to the elderly. So that is something that is important. The second issue is that of a steeply escalating healthcare cost versus declining interest rate and pension incomes. Now you need to understand that the healthcare cost, rising healthcare cost, will largely impact two sections. One is the below poverty line, or who are on the margin of the poverty line, because what happens is that once the healthcare cost is increased, these population, even the ones who are slightly above the poverty line, they have a risk of falling below the poverty line. So that is the first group. The second group who will be mostly affected is the elderly. Why? Because the elderly are the demand of healthcare services is the highest for elderly. So this is something that is important, and this is happening in the background of declining real interest rates in the country, as large number of elderly are largely dependent on the savings in the banks, and on these savings they get an interest rate, and these interest rates are their income. So if these interest rates are going to be low, and also they are going to be taxed high, then definitely the money in hand of the elderly is going to reduce. So this is something important. And the pension incomes in the country are also not very high, and especially for those who are not in the government services. So this is something that you need to understand. Now in this respect, some incentives on tax is something that the government has given. For example, it has raised the exemption limit on interest rates from 10,000 rupees to 50,000 rupees. Previously, the interest rates, the interest rates that was treated as income, it was taxed beyond 10,000 rupees. Now this limit has been raised to 50,000 rupees. So indeed, this is a welcome step. Another thing is that there is a proposal to raise the annual income tax deduction limit for health insurance premium or medical reimbursement to rupees 50,000 for all senior citizens, which means that if they have a health insurance, then for that also 50,000 rupees will be deducted from the tax. So that is something that is important. Another thing is that there is a move to set the ceiling for deduction in lieu of expenses occurred on critical illness to rupees 1 lakh. This ceiling will be increased to 1 lakh for those who are suffering from a critical illness. So indeed, all these tax incentives that the government has given is something that is a welcome step for the elderly. So this is something that has been analyzed. Another thing is that of the Pradhan Mantri Vyay Vandana Yojana. Now this is a scheme for the elderly, and this scheme has been extended for 2 more years. Under this scheme, the elderly can deposit a sum of now 15 lakh rupees. Previously it was 7.5 lakh rupees only. Now they can the elderly can deposit this 15 lakh rupees in their bank accounts, and they will get an interest rate of 8% under this scheme. So this is definitely a good scheme, because then this will ensure regular interest rates, and it will act as a source of a pension for the citizens. So this is something that is important. Another thing is, another analysis which has been given is that of a right to life with dignity. Now previously also we have done a discussion in euthanasia, where I had mentioned that it is not only important to ensure a right to life, but a right to life with dignity is something that is important. And there also the case was of a elderly couple who had requested the president to allow them active euthanasia. So definitely this is a major cause of concern, and a life with dignity is something that should not retire with a particular age. So this is something that is an important keyword which has been given, that a right to life with dignity doesn't retire with crossing a chronological threshold age. So this is something that is important. Another thing is which is important is that these interest rates and these policies, these tax incentives by the government, are largely for the urban elderly. This is because the elderly in the rural areas are not having access to bank accounts only. So as a result of which, these benefits will have impact. Definitely this is good, but this is going to impact only 30% of the elderly population, because 70% of the elderly population is in the rural area. So definitely government needs to focus on this 70% also, and for this what is vital is that social welfare spending of the government is increased, and the schemes targeted at the elderly is something that is reached to them in the rural area. So this is one other analysis which has been made in this particular editorial. Indeed, the topic of elderly is very, very important, and so in this respect you should know the schemes which the government has. Also the budget, what the provisions were made for the elderly in the budget will become important for all your answers related to the elderly. So that is the relevance of this article. Coming to the next article, mixing work with study. Now, largely the context of this article is the recent Annual Status of Education Report 2017. This is a report which is released by the Pratham NGO. And as for this report, the focus was largely on this age group of 14 to 18 years. And the report, which was named as Beyond Basics, has given some trends with specifically to this particular age group. So it is in that context that this article has been written. So coming to the issues, first and foremost is the issue of affordability and availability of schools in higher secondary education. Now, the report has brought to the fore that the age group of 14 to 18 years, in this age group, a large number of students are not enrolled in any school or college. A number has been given that 14.4% of the students have not been enrolled in any school. So, an issue is raised about the affordability and the availability of higher secondary education in the country. Because if a large number of students are opting out, then indeed it is a matter of concern. At present, the the right to education has ensured that 6 to 14 years of age group is covered in the education system, and under this act, India has ensured 100% enrollment rate for this particular age group. So indeed, steps need to be taken to expand this program now. So that is something that is analyzed here. Another thing which is given is that of a dual German model. Now, this is something that is very important. Here you need to understand that vocational education system on the lines of a dual German model is something that India needs. This includes a classroom instruction program along with an apprenticeship training program, and this will help raise the productivity of the entire country as well as the individuals. So this classroom studying plus training was something that was even advocated by Gandhiji in his program of Nai Talim. So this is something that needs to be brought back. Skill training is something that is vital, and targeting this age group in the backdrop of rising demographic dividend of the country is indeed vital. So that is something that has been analyzed. Another thing which is important is with regards to the skill building programs. Now here the author has analyzed that only 5.3% of the age group of the people in this age group of 14 to 18 years has been enrolled in any vocational course, and indeed this number, the 5.3%, is a very small number as compared to the entire demand of the skills in the country. So definitely in this regard steps need to be taken, and there is a need to scale up the skill building programs in the country, and making them free or highly subsidized will ensure that a large number of the students in this particular age group can take the benefit of the skill building program. So that is something that has been analyzed. Now this last point with respect to the agriculture sector is what is the most important. UPSC will always welcome any kind of a linkage. So this is a stark example of how linkage is done. Now what here has been analyzed is that amongst this 14 to 18 age group, a large number of children are largely employed, but they are employed in the education, in the agriculture sector. So it is in this sector that the government should focus. For example, if there is going to be a useful education in the agriculture programs, and if this is going to be coupled with access to formal economy of finance and marketing, then definitely this can act as a relevant skill building in the agriculture sector. This could also be propelled for food processing industry. So skilling should be focused with respect to the agricultural sector, because at present itself a large chunk of this particular age group is employed in the agriculture sector. So that is one analysis which has been given. Indeed this point is very relevant, and the topic is of utmost importance from skill development point of view, education point of view. Indeed this is an important article. Now coming to the next article, crisis in Malé. Now basically the context is with regards to the constitutional crisis which has taken place in Maldives. So this topic is not as such, the politics in Maldives is something that is not of much relevance for UPSC, but some impacts on India are relevant. So that is, we shall limit our discussion to that aspect. First and foremost, you need to know something about the background. Now in 2013 there were elections which were held in Maldives. And in these elections, the current president, Mr. Abdullah Yameen, had won, and he came to power after defeating his opponent, Mohammad Nasheed. Now, Mohammad Nasheed had been deposed previously in the year 2012, and after that in 2013 election he was defeated. However, a number of times questions are raised on the fairness of these elections. These elections are said to have taken place in a very unfair environment. So that is definitely one criticism on the 2013 election in Maldives. Another thing is that again, after the elections in 2015, a judgment was given against the former president, Mohammad Nasheed, and he was sentenced to 13 years of jail on grounds of terrorism. So that is something that is relevant to the background. And now recently, the Supreme Court has given a judgment where he has released 9 leaders who were in jail, and this is including Mohammad Nasheed. And this recent judgment by the Supreme Court is something that has raised a storm in the political echelons of Maldives, and it is being said that the present government is saying that it is not going to implement the Supreme Court orders. So that is what is the entire controversy. Now coming to the issues which are important. First and foremost is the refusal to heed to the Supreme Court orders. Indeed, this will result in a political deadlock, in a constitutional deadlock in Maldives. So that is something that is a cause of concern. Another thing is that the elections in Maldives are due this year, and Mr. Mohammad Nasheed is now willing to fight the elections, and this is something that has become controversial, and the present government, it is feared that the present government is not going to allow for these elections to be held. So that is something that is important. Another thing is, which is vital, is the international sentiment in this regard. Now you need to know countries like the US, even the European Union, and even India all have criticized the role of the present government in Maldives, and they have said that the government should follow the Supreme Court orders and should ensure free and fair elections. So that is something that is vital. Another thing is that of India's role. Now here you need to know that amongst all the South Asian countries and the Indian Ocean Rim countries, the Prime Minister of India has visited all these countries except Maldives. So India has not had a good engagement with Maldives, with the present government of Abdullah Yameen. However, the previous government, that of Mohammad Nasheed, India had a very good relationship with Mohammad Nasheed, and even in 2012 when he was disposed of his power, he took refuge in the Indian embassy in Maldives. So that is something that you need to know, that this matter is vital for India. Another thing is that which has been analyzed is the weakened role of the SAARC. Now here if ever you are to analyze that what is the ramifications of weakening of SARC, then you can give this stark example that because SARC has been diluted and Maldives was a part of SARC, so a consensus, a regional consensus or a regional pressure in this matter is something that is not happening. So that is indeed a major cause of concern, and this India should have played a leadership role in solving this regional problem. So that has not emerged. So that is something that has been analyzed here. In the article will have several developments in future, so we'll keep a pace with that. So yeah, now for some questions for today. These two questions are with regards to our discussion today, so I hope that you will try and attempt these questions. So with this we finish, but before that, some piece of information. We are starting a prelims batch from today, 5th of February 2018. It shall be covering, or it shall be a comprehensive program for all prelims related syllabus, specifically focused on the prelims of 2018. So all interested candidates, do get in touch with us. These are our, this is our address, and this is our phone number. So with this we finish today's discussion. I thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you tomorrow.